Well, good morning, Boker Tov, Hag Sameach, Pesach. Good to see everybody this morning. Hope you're doing well. Baruch Hashem. We are into the fourth day now of Pesach as a Chol HaMoed, and so we have a special reading today that is going to be coming from from the book of Exodus and Parashah Mishpatim, which is a great parashah of the Torah, and it's going to begin in chapter 22 of the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, and verse 24. And it's going to continue through chapter 23 into the 19th verse. We're going to be reading about a particularly important topic in Judaism about, lending money to our fellow. And then, of course, it gets into the festivals, the three, as they call pilgrimage festivals and so on. So if you have the Art Scroll Chumash, it actually begins on page 431. If you want to follow along reading here, the Hebrew, of course, naturally is on page 430, and the English is on page 431. So this is what it says. When you lend money to people, to the poor person who is with you, do not act towards him as a creditor. Do not lay interest upon him. If you take your fellow's garment as security, until sunset shall you return it to him. For it alone is his clothing. It is his garment. For his skin is for his skin, and what should he lie down? So it will be that if he cries out to me, I shall listen, for I am compassionate. Verse 27 says, you shall not revile God. You shall not curse a leader among your people. Do not delay your fullness offering or your priestly heave offering. The firstborn of your sons shall you present to me. So shall you do to your ox, to your flock. For a 7-day period shall it be with its mother. On the 8th day, you may present it to me. Now, just to pause there for a moment, I want to mention something about that, because why is it that we circumcise our sons on the 8th day? What is the reason for this? Well, aside from the obvious, bringing the child into the covenant and so on, and fulfillment of God's commandment, et cetera, but one of the interesting aspects of this is that something I've talked about at length is that Judaism, does not believe in, abhors human sacrifice. We, we're not pagans, we're not whatever. And so the idea of sacrificing a human being unto Hashem is just considered abhorrent. And yet, at the same time, one of the strange dichotomies is that human sacrifice is foundational to the temple service. Now, that seems contradictory, and it seems like two completely opposites, but sometimes that happens in Judaism. As an example, we've spoken about the fact that Messiah came from a really, really tragic, a really abhorrent line of people. I mean, in the Messiah's lineage is Lot's daughters, and their offspring, the products of incest. Rahab, who ran a brothel in Jericho. I mean, these are, and let's not forget, of course, one of the big ones is naturally Bathsheba, who, was the outcome of the murder and adultery of King David. Out of that came the seeds of Messiah. So we see that from something that is considered abhorrent, something of purity arises. And so when I say that human sacrifice is foundational to the Jewish sacrificial system, it's absolutely true. We've talked about this as it relates to Isaac Every offering that was offered in the temple, every single one pointed to Isaac, just as much as every single sin that's committed is a shadow, a type and shadow, a representation of the sin of Adam, every single one. And so, what does this have to do with bris milah? Well, it's interesting that and don't forget, by the way, that the Zohar talks about the fact that the high priest in heaven, who is Michael, who serves in the tabernacle of heaven, which is called the tabernacle of Memtet, offers upon the supernal Mizbeach altar the souls of the righteous. So we see in heaven that even though human sacrifice is considered abhorrent, at the same time, it's the souls of the righteous that are offered on the altar in Shemayim. So going back to bris milah, one of the beautiful things about bris milah is that when a father lays his son on the lap of the sandak is the one chosen by the family to be the honorary one who's going to hold the child while the child is being circumcised. It's called the sandak. And so when he puts his son on the lap of the sandak, the sages say that the moment the child is being the moment the child is being circumcised, that it's as if the father has laid upon the altar all of the sacrifices of the temple. So interestingly, from a sod level, from an esoteric level, Judaism understands that child that's being laid upon the altar to be circumcised represents all of the offerings of the tabernacle, and the father at that moment is credited as having offered all those offerings. Isn't that intriguing? Isn't that interesting? Now, what is that? Why did I bring that up, and what does that have to do with what we just read? Well, let's read this sentence again, this verse from verse 29. So shall you do to your ox, to your flock, for a 7-day period shall it be with its mother, and on the 8th day you may present it to me. So the 8th day, which the number 8 represents new beginnings, in this case, the 8th day is the day upon which a member of the flock or an oxen or what have you is eligible to be offered in the temple. You cannot offer a lamb or a goat or an oxen or whatever in the temple until it's at least 8 days old. This is why we circumcise a child on the 8th day, because it's on the 8th day and thereafter that the child is eligible to be an offering. So verse 30 says, people of holiness shall you be to me. You shall not eat the flesh of an animal that was torn in the field. To the dog shall you throw it. This is talking about treifa. Treifa meat. Treifa is a word that means torn. And I'm just scanning over here to see. Yeah, it's actually, you can see it in the verse. Look at the Hebrew side, which if you're using art school Chumash, verse 30 is going to be represented by a lamed, the Hebrew letter lamed, which is equivalent to 30. And it says, Vayanoshe kodosh techun li uvasar bevas de terefa. You can see it in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th word in Hebrew is treifa. I just want to point this out because in Judaism in general, when you're talking about meat that would be otherwise kosher, like beef or lamb or chicken or whatever, if it's not kosher slaughtered, it's considered treifa. It's considered torn. And so that meat is not to be eaten by a Jew. You have to throw it to the dogs. Now, meat that is not considered kosher is not food ever, right? So there's no way to make swine flesh kosher, as an example, or to make the flesh of, I don't know, snake or whatever it kosher. It's always not food, but meat rather that has not been kosher slaughtered is considered treifa. So now we get into chapter 23, verse 1. These are these verses I'm about to read, this last, first couple of verses are particularly poignant, I think, for the day and age in which we live. So here it is. Do not accept a false report. Do not extend your hand with the wicked to be a venal witness. Do not be a follower of the majority for evil, and do not respond to a grievance by yielding to the majority to pervert the law. Verse 3, do not glorify a destitute person in his grievance. Number 4, if you encounter an ox of your enemy or your donkey wandering, you shall return it to him repeatedly. So looking at the Chumash on this and just kind of taking a glance at what it says here, this is talking, it says, about the integrity of the judicial process. Another topic that we've covered before, most people are not aware of, and that is that in Judaism, there is and was what you call due process. A lot of believers that have a superficial understanding at best of Judaism have been taught erroneously to believe that back in the so-called Old Testament days, it was just like the wild, wild west. If we caught you sinning or breaking the Torah, we would just drop what we were doing, ceremonially drag you to the back 40 of the village, stone you to death, throw you off the cliff, and then go back and eat our lunch. And that's how people perceived Judaism prior to the advent of grace. When grace came, of course, we all calmed down and stopped doing that. But prior to that, we were just like a bunch of barbarians. If we caught you breaking the Sabbath, we would just naturally stone you to death. If our children, little Johnny, little Susie, they're 5, 6, 7 years old, if they back-talked us, we would take them out back and we would have to kill them naturally. The law of God tells us we have to kill a child who backtalks us. So, it was brutal. It was horrible. It was, crazy. Of course, none of that is true, but that's what people believe. The reality is that there was actually a significant amount of due process, some of which comes from the written law, most of which actually based on the written law comes from the oral law. And the due process is extensive. It's the basis of the due process we have in our country for criminal law and even civil law. And it made it nearly impossible to actually execute somebody. The due process was such that a person brought up on charges to be executed, which, by the way, could never occur. Just so you know, some of you know this already, some of you may not. But I think it's important to mention, especially when you're talking to maybe some of your friends who have been told these crazy stories about how Jews just would willy-nilly kill people for violating the Sabbath or whatever. But you should know that no one was allowed to bring down a death sentence in Judaism unless the person was brought before, at the very minimum, the what was called the Sanhedrin Katan. The Sanhedrin Katan, or the small Sanhedrin, consisted of 21 judges. Now, the judges, by the way, again, just so you know, they had to be duly appointed. They had to be they had to have smika. They had to have they were formal and official. In other words, it wasn't just, hey, let's grab 21 guys randomly off the street. No, these were official judges, and they were part of the Sanhedrin Katan. And you at the very minimum, you had to have 21 of them, 21, to actually bring down a death sentence. If it was a matter that involved an elder, a sage, a prophet, or something like that, you had to have the full Sanhedrin of 71, same thing, duly appointed judges. Some of you may be wondering, if you're watching this, you're thinking, well, if that's true, then why was it that the Jewish people seemed so bloodthirsty and ready to kill Messiah? And in fact, they did. No. Well, as I mentioned on the Seder, some of you heard me say this, some may be watching this and you have no idea about that. But in actual fact, the trial that took place with the Messiah was a sham trial led by the Sadducees. It was completely kangaroo court and did not follow Jewish practice, actually. For one, you're not allowed to have court at night. Number two, if the Sanhedrin, and in this case, because of Yeshua's status, would have had to have been the full Sanhedrin, the 71 judges, okay, because he's a leader. He was considered a leader and definitely considered a sage and definitely considered a prophet. So you would have to have the full Sanhedrin. And the full Sanhedrin the Sanhedrin period, but certainly the full Sanhedrin has to meet in the chamber of hewn stone in the temple courts. It's not allowed to convene anywhere else but that specific space. And we learn in the Gospels that Caiaphas had the trial at his house. Now, Caiaphas is a wealthy man. I'm sure his house is bigger than most, maybe even the biggest in Jerusalem. However, homes in the first century were, by our standards, itty bitty, tiny. And so there's no way, I'm just going to say this, I've never seen Caiaphas' house, if it even exists, still today. But I'm just going to tell you, there's no way you're going to be able to get 71 judges in a first century house. There's just no way. And so that tells me, since it took place at Caiaphas' house, it did not include all 71 judges. And so the whole thing's a sham. And it was led by the Sadducees, and the Sadducees didn't follow this due process, and therefore it was not really a Jewish court that condemned him. It was actually the court of Roman puppets, because Caiaphas was a Roman puppet bought and paid for by the governor of Judea at the time, who happened to be Pontius Pilate. Every time a new governor would come and rule over Judea, he would appoint his own high priest, which is not allowed by Torah law. And this is brought down to us by Josephus. We know this for historical fact. And so Caiaphas was a Roman puppet. So just so you know, this is how the due process was not followed in the case of the Messiah. And therefore, it wasn't the Pharisees that condemned him, but rather the Sadducees, because the Pharisees would have said, hey, none of this is following the proper process. So this section here about not accepting a false report, not extending our hands with the wicked, not to be a venal witness, this is all part of integrity in the due process. So just looking here at the Chumash, it says, don't accept, lo tisa, don't believe it. It is forbidden to believe unverified gossip about another person. Wow, if we could only internalize that and bring that into our modern day society, we would be so much happier as people. It's Zipporah, I know you were writing that just as I was reading this, so we crossed our lines there. It is forbidden to believe unverified gossip about another person. This applies both to an individual who is forbidden to believe it, that is lashon hara, evil talk, and to a judge who is forbidden to listen to a disputant unless the second party is present. Wow. So again, a judge, in the case of a judge, he can't listen to somebody's claims, to somebody's, his dispute, unless the person with whom he's disputing is present there. The Rasha, the wicked is, according to Rashi, this refers to a wicked litigant who seeks to enlist a witness to support his contention. According to Ibn Ezra and Sforno, the wicked one is a false witness who needs a second witness to corroborate his testimony. This is also an admonition, not to testify with a disqualified witness, even if what he is saying happens to be true. An honest witness is forbidden to associate his testimony with a dishonest person. An honest witness is forbidden to associate his testimony with a dishonest person. So just so you know, that in the Proverbs, it talks about the 7 abominations, the 7 things that God hates. I'm going to submit to you that if we ever read anything that says God hates something, or he considers it an abomination, I'm going to suggest that that's something that we might want to pay particular close attention to, that we don't become whatever it is that's being discussed. In this case, in the Proverbs, it's saying that one of the 7 things that God hates, that he abhors, is a false witness. And of course, naturally, on the Peshat level, that's talking about someone who is literally being a witness in a judicial proceeding. But on a deeper level, it means that someone who is spreading gossip. I heard this about somebody, blah, blah, blah. The problem with that is that you don't know anything. You don't really know. You don't know the facts. You're not really sure. You haven't heard the other side of the discussion, or whatever the case may be. So the problem is that and this is, I think, in my opinion, this is what makes Lashon Hara so bad. Spreading gossip. And by the way, gossip doesn't necessarily mean that it's a lie. It could be something that's true. But when we spread gossip and we don't know, because we weren't there, we didn't see, or we don't have all the facts, or even if you think you all have all the facts, you don't. And so by spreading that or talking about it, we inevitably become a false witness. Naturally, you can't be a true witness if you don't know what's going on here. And of course, and from a legal point of view, that's called hearsay anyway, because you're not an eyewitness to it. You weren't literally standing there witnessing the whole thing, or whatever it was. And so therefore, if you heard about something and then you're spreading that, you are what's called hearsay, that hearsay is not admissible in a court setting at all. And so you can't say, well, I heard that somebody told me, that she said, that he said, that they did, or whatever. That's called hearsay. It's not even admissible. And so once you stand up and say, well, I'm telling you right now, this is what happened, and you don't know, you just become a false witness. And this is why it's so bad. And so this is why we have to be very, very, very careful about spreading things. And I will tell you from experience, and the Rebbetzin would agree with me on this, because we have been around the block, counseled a lot of people on different topics. I say counseled, really it's a matter of sitting down with people and listening to their stories and what have you, trying to help them, find a path forward, whatever. But I will tell you that we've learned over the years that there's always another side to the story. There is always another side to the story. And the story that you may be listening to may be the right side. It may be somebody who has a true grievance or a true concern or a real issue. And I can always tell you that when you sit down with the other person in the situation, the dispute or the relationship, you will always be enlightened to the other side of the situation. And it's just the nature of things. So don't forget that. So it says, don't glorify a destitute person in his grievance. That's another important point, right? Because sometimes we like to take those who are the down and outers. We like to take people that are the underdogs. In this case, is usually the poor, and we want to glorify them. We want to exalt them. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to show favoritism. This is talking from a judicial point of view. It says here, as an example, despite the temptation to ease the plight of the poor by allowing them to win their case and therefore receive money with dignity from the rich, who will not miss it in any case. So you might be thinking, well, you're not going to miss your money anyway. It is forbidden to pervert the law, no matter how noble the intention. It is forbidden to pervert the law, no matter how noble one might think the intentions are. And of course, it says in verse 4, if you encounter the ox of your friend, or your enemies rather, or his donkey wandering, you must return it to him repeatedly. So repeatedly here is talking about the fact that even if it's lost again and again, you have to return it. Baba Metzia 30b says the finder may not ignore it on the grounds that the owner is apparently careless. We have a responsibility to return things once we find them, and if it happens to be something that belongs to your enemy, it doesn't. You still have to return it. Now, our reading continues. Says, if you see the donkey of someone you hate crouching under its burden, would you refrain from helping him? You shall help repeatedly with him. There's that repeatedly thing again. We see this happens over and over again. You have to jump in and help, even if it's your enemy. And you can say, well, I helped him before, but I don't have to help him. Yes, you have to help him again, if that kind of thing. Of course, the donkey is a euphemism. We're not generally going to see somebody with their donkey broken down on the side of the road these days, but if it's something that is applicable, the same thing applies to us. Verse 6, do not pervert the judgment of your destitute person in his grievance. Distance yourself from a false word. Do not execute the innocent or the righteous, for I shall not exonerate the wicked. Do not accept a bribe, for the bribe will blind those who see and corrupt words that are just. Do not oppress a stranger. Now, in this case, a stranger is referring to a convert. Do not oppress a stranger who you know the feelings of a stranger, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. Again, this is why part of the reason why this reading is a part of our Pesach is because it brings us back to the compassion that we have is rooted in the compassion we wanted when we were slaves in Egypt. 6 years shall you sow your land and gather in its produce. And the 7th you shall leave it unattended and unharvested, and the destitute of your people shall eat, and the wildlife of the field shall eat what is left of them. So shall you do to your vineyard and your olive grove. This, of course, is talking about the Shemitah year, where we let the land rest. We don't harvest it. Of course, in another place, God says, rather, he's going to provide for us a double, triple portion. We're supposed to leave what grows naturally and wildly to the poor and to the wildlife. And this is a great example of how God cares for the wildlife, and he charges us to care for the wildlife. Something else about the Shemitah year that I want to emphasize to all of you, and that is the Shemitah year and its laws do not apply outside of the land of Israel. Let me say that again. The Shemitah year and its laws do not apply outside of the land of Israel. There is no Shemitah year in New York. There's no Shemitah year in Texas. There's no Shemitah year in South Africa or Australia or anywhere else but the land of Israel. And I say that with emphasis because people are always very often asking me, is this a Shemitah year? Are we supposed to let our fields rest? Now, this doesn't apply to to trees, like fruit trees, right? That's not Shemitah. So if you plant a fruit tree, you're not allowed to eat it for 5 years or whatever. That's not, I'm talking about letting the land rest. The other reason I bring this down is because a few years ago, a Messianic leader wrote a book, and it was wildly popular, and it employed the concepts of the Shemitah year, applied them to the United States of America, and to Wall Street or something like that. And this particular gentleman, who is, again, very popular book, basically predicted the end of the world and the coming of the Messiah somewhere around 2000. I forget when it was actually. Was it 13 or 2010 or it doesn't even matter. But he predicted there was going to be a financial collapse. There was going to be a coming of the Messiah. It had to do with the Shemitah year, and all these Messianics and all these people and Christians were buying this book by the busloads, and really got wrapped up in the Shemitah year and blah, 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 blah. And of course, naturally, anybody who predicts the coming of the Messiah, they are 100% wrong every time, every single time. And so, of course, so was he. And did he come back after none of that happened and say, oops, sorry? No, he didn't. He just wrote another book. But what messed people up was that he was applying the Shemitah year principles and laws outside the land of Israel. This is one of the reasons I bring this up. And one of the reasons is because this is why it's important to know Jewish law and to apply it properly, because you got all these people. And then you say, well, I bring this book up, I bring this prediction up. It wasn't harmless. It was not harmless. I can guarantee you, my friends, that there are scores and scores, dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of people whose faith was rocked, who lost faith, who now have a cynical attitude towards the Messiah and so on because of this type of garbage. They get a hold of a book and they're predicting a financial collapse, predicting the coming of the Messiah, something about Wall Street and a bull or some nonsense. The bull is like the golden calf, or big eye roll, whatever he was writing. It was garbage. When the book was shown to me, I scanned through it. It was garbage. And a lot of people got wrapped up into it, and it's that kind of stuff is destructive, and it hurt a lot of people's faith. And of course, naturally, again, the guy didn't get up and say, oops, I'm so sorry, I repent for making a false prediction, which the sages tell us, by the way, when we try to predict the coming of the Messiah, we invite demons into our life. And I believe that 100%. And so, no, he just continues on, and, it just hurts people. And so we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to believe that. We have to, anytime anybody makes trust me, you take this to the bank. You can believe this 100,000%. Anytime anybody predicts the coming of the Messiah, they are wrong and they are in error, and it will never, ever occur on that date. And so you just don't even pay attention to it. Just be like, yeah, whatever. It's never going to happen. And all this comes back to a misapplication of the laws of the Shemitah. So it says, going on here, just continue wrapping up our reading. 6 days shall you accomplish your activities. On the 7th day you shall desist, so that your ox and donkey may be content, and your maidservant, son, and the sojourner may be refreshed. So naturally, we're supposed to rest on the 7th day. Be careful regarding everything I've said to you. The name of the gods of others you should not mention. This is where we get the Jewish custom of not saying the name of false gods, unless, of course, we're in a teaching setting and, we're talking about it from a teaching setting. But this is talking about in the course of our normal conversation. Nor shall your mouth cause it to be heard. Verse 14. 3 pilgrim festivals shall you celebrate for me during the year. You shall observe the feast of Matzot. 7 days shall you eat Matzot, as I have commanded you, at the appointed time of the month of springtime. For in it you left Egypt, and you shall not be seen before me empty-handed. And the festival of the harvest of the first fruits of your labor that you sow in the field, the feast of ingathering, is talking about Shavuot and Sukkot. At the close of the year, when you gather in your work for the field. Now, notice, by the way, as we talked about people who have alternative calendars and all that mess. Notice right here in the Torah that it refers to the festival of Sukkot as the close of the year. Did you notice that? So people say, no, the Jews are wrong. The close of the year is Adar because the first of the year is Nisan. Well, that's not what the Torah says. The Torah says the beginning of the months is Nisan, but the close of the year is Sukkot. Why is Sukkot the close of the year? Because it ends during the month of Tishrei when the year begins. So the three pilgrimage festivals are Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and that's what it's talking about here. 3 times during the year shall all your men folk appear before the Lord, Adonai. This is when the temple is present. If the temple were present, maybe rebuilt sooner days, we would have to go to Jerusalem. You shall not offer the blood of my feast offerings upon leavened bread, nor may the fat of my feast offerings remain overnight until morning. The choicest first fruit of your land shall you bring to the house of Adonai your God, and you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. This means we're not allowed to have meat and dairy together. That's absolutely what that means. I've talked about that at length in another video, but you should just know that's what that means. End of our Aliyah today. That was a lot of information, but hopefully helpful and hopefully inspiring. Thank you for being with me. Chag Sameach Pesach. May you have a beautiful and wonderful day today as you enjoy the festivities. And we'll be back tomorrow and we'll be looking at another special reading of the holiday as we grow closer and closer to the 7th day. Remember again that Thursday night is an Erev, Friday is a Yom Tov, then we have Shabbat, of course, which is the regular Shabbat. So shalom, everybody. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. Have a great and wonderful day. Chag Sameach Pesach.